Recording in progress.
I call the study session for the City of Ashland Planning Commission to order for May 26, 2026. I will note that our meetings are available on Zoom and RVTV. The public can find information on how to participate in Planning Commission meetings in our public notices, as well as directions on how to find full meeting materials, applications, and staff reports. I note that we have 6 of the 7 commissioners here, so we do have a quorum. Staff announcements.
Thank you, Chair Werner. I wanted to announce that on May 21st, the city held its annual Historic Preservation Awards and awarded for a compatible ADU to 53 Pine Street, compatible new residential within a historic district to 114 Bush Street, historic compatible commercial at 27 North Main, and multifamily historic new construction at 292 Gresham Street. Also wanted to acknowledge that the Historic Preservation Advisory Committee provided an individual award to Madeline Hill, who championed the creation of Mountain Meadows area, although not a historic district. It will be at some point in the future, and we'll have her largely to thank for that. So that's the only announcements I have.
How old is Mountain Meadows?
30, I think 98 or 97.
Still, that's old. Okay.
So 15 years from now, it would
It would
qualify.
qualify, okay. Public forum, we have 1 member of the audience. Would you like to speak to us? No, okay, then we're going to move on to other business, which is the finalization of Planning Commission recommendation to City Council on a request for similar use interpretation as provided in AMC 18.1.5 with regards to a distinction between private parking and public parking as a regulated use. The action is for PA-T1-2026-00297 at 40 North Main. Commissioners, do you have ex parte contact? Eric?
No ex parte.
Carrie?
No ex parte.
Jay?
No ex parte.
Susan?
No ex parte.
John Marr?
No ex parte.
And I have not had any ex parte contact either, so we will move on to actual deliberations and discussion. You have the written report in front of you. Any questions about it, or want to make any changes to the written report? No? If not, then I would accept a motion to recommend to the City Council what we said last time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if a motion is necessary. If there was changes that the commission recommended, then we can incorporate those. But if it is substantially what you recall from our prior meeting, we will take it forward to council on June 16th.
Okay, go for it. So we're on to item number 4, to a discussion item of legislative amendments to Senate Bill 974 from 2025 legislative session, our favorite topic, because it puts us out of work. Brandon?
Sure. So the Planning Commission is eminently familiar with this. We provided an update to this commission about a number of legislative changes, but my recollection is 974 constituted the bulk of conversation that we had that evening. So tonight's discussion is really centered on a significant procedural shift being imposed through the state Senate Bill 974. More than anything else, this bill changes how certain land use applications, specifically residential land use applications, are processed locally, and who serves as the decision maker at different stages of review. Under Ashland's existing code structure, the Planning Commission recognizes that you serve as the initial hearing body for type 2 planning actions with appeals heard by the City Council. 974 changes that structure for qualifying housing applications by requiring the initial decision initially to be administrative, and if appealed, the Planning Commission would hear the appeal and become the final local decision maker for the city, with any further appeals being directly to the Land Use Board of Appeals. So while tonight's packet contains several technical code amendments, the larger issue is really a broad shift away from that initial quasi-judicial hearings and towards administrative housing approvals. And again, these are state law at this point. The bill that was passed created a category called urban housing applications, and those include certain residential performance standards option subdivisions, residential variances, certain residential upzones, and it only applies within the urban growth boundary and property zoned for residential and mixed use. And really, as we discussed before, the intention behind this measure is to streamline housing development by reducing local procedural obstacles for development. So with that in mind, staff evaluated how it applies to each of those provisions and provided you draft language for any feedback that you may have before an ordinance is drafted for consideration. A couple areas that came up and were discussed previously was how 974 addresses residential upzones. And at this point, the draft code before you is not proposing amendments to the city code zone change procedures, although Senate Bill 974 calls for that. And essentially the reason is that 974 appears to conflict with existing Oregon statutes, specifically ORS 227.186, which still requires by state law notice hearings for any ordinance adoption procedures for rezoning. So until the rulemaking and guidance from the state is complete, staff believes retaining the existing procedure is the most legally defensible approach at this point. And again, with consultation with our legal division on that. However, we have proposed a number of amendments throughout the remainder of code. Specifically, I have a couple of points for discussion on performance standards subdivision amendments. The performance standards option currently outline plans are reviewed as a type 2 planning action before the Planning Commission. Under 974, that becomes a staff administrative role and could be appealed to the Planning Commission. And final plans are reviewed administratively if in concurrence with the prior outline plan for type 1 as type 1 actions. So because those are both administrative approvals, staff is proposing that qualifying performance standard option subdivision move into administrative review structure while still preserving the right to appeal to the Planning Commission. But staff is also proposing to retain the two-step outline and final plan process for larger subdivisions, but is looking for direction in terms of increasing the threshold requiring two separate administrative outline and final plan reviews for projects that are 20 lots or less. Currently, the threshold is 10. So I do want to note that that is in alignment with the intention of 974, but not required by 974. So that is discretionary for the city as to whether to change that two-step process because it is entirely a local review process. So I'm not sure if you want me to go through the other amendments or we can stop at these and
talk about this one?
yeah.
Anybody have any comments? Susan?
So relative to that last one, what was the logic on increasing from 10 to 20 or more? Is 20, is there a fact basis for that number?
The Senate Bill 974 does refer to rules for subdivisions of 20 units or greater. However, that's not really the pertinent issue. We were looking at establishing at least a minimum of 12, and that was for consistency with other existing code provisions for cottage housing developments that allow 12 cottage units and to have them go through a two-step process It's also been recognized that at 20 units or less, or 20 lots or less, the infrastructure improvements typically, can be provided at outline plan. A good example of, where we see new streets, new infrastructure, and a lot of engineering, it's usually larger subdivisions. But again, it is somewhat 10 was an arbitrary number. 12 is consistent with cottage housing, but if we wanted to go to 20, and an applicant still could propose to do a two-step process by which they apply for an outline plan, get approval, and then do all the engineering and apply for final plan. But if they had all their ducks in a row, the question was, does a two-step process benefit the process if there's no hearing?
So why are we looking to change the number? I mean, if 12, I get 12, but why?
Again, it was really looking at alignment with the intent of having residential development streamlined. But again, if this commission doesn't want to make that recommendation, we'll still look for direction on whether 10, 12, and staff propose 20 to.
12 seemed to, I thought we talked about
We
12
did.
last time, yeah. And 12 makes sense to me.
Well, it makes sense to be internally consistent,
Right.
and if that's 12, then 12 makes sense. So,
How do the developers feel?
well,
No, I'm asking,
those who are
I'll
developers.
go, although I'm fairly new at this. I mean, 12 or 20, I mean, I think you make a good point about cottage communities, and so that makes logical sense. I mean, I'd have to look at the applications. I mean, presumably you've done some analysis to determine how this is going to administratively burden staff, because more of the applications are going to shift forward.
So, and I thank you for that point. I think one staff consideration that we were looking at is a two-step process does have both costs for developers and time, but also administratively is processing an outline plan, going through a notice process, and making a decision, then doing a final plan. If it's substantially similar, it does increase workload for staff. But again, that is not really a decision point that you guys need to concern yourself with.
so many projects come through and they run outline and final at the same time anyway. If they've got their act together, they do. How many subdivisions over 12 are left in the city of Ashland?
Yeah, I think that it is smaller subdivisions, unless it's a cottage housing development, or substantially larger than, in terms of annexation into the city, which would then trigger a, public hearing under our prior discussion point anyway,
So it's really a moot point anyway.
unless you're proposing a 13 or 14 unit on a property, in which case.
Susan?
So was not here last month when I think this was discussed, but in terms of intent versus actual impact, we all know that there's a desire for more housing, for more affordable housing. Is there a concern that this change would actually have an impact that was quite different from that was more of an enabler for high-end housing?
Yeah, no, that's not a concern that I had considered. I don't think that the two-step process corresponds to the cost of housing. So essentially a developer coming in for an outline plan approval, in some cases, they've done all of their engineering before they walk in the door, in which case a two-step process is really a time issue on the developer side and a workload issue on the staff side. But there are also developers that want to go through that approval process before spending resources to have all that final engineering done to see if there's any modifications that are required, in which case the two-step process the first step lets them get the approval or the modification to the street alignment and then do the engineering. So,
Well, and one can imagine that perhaps a lower bar of entry makes it easier for, again, lower cost of housing developments that may have less, funding overall, might be on tighter budgets, et cetera. I just was wondering, in a world where good intentions often have opposite impacts, whether that was a concern, but it sounds like not.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a risk analysis for the developer in terms of whether it makes more sense to do it in a two-step process or a one. I don't think that we would preclude a two-step process. We would just make it an option to provide for a concurrent outline and final plan, as we do now.
So on that issue of, I'm confused by, maybe it's the existing language that says for fewer than 10 lots, the outline plan may be filed concurrently with the final plan. And then if you have more than 20 lots, a prior outline plan approval is mandatory. So is that saying that you need to go through the outline plan? If you have 20 or more lots, you have to go through the outline plan and then do the final plan later?
If you have, the way it was worded, currently an outline plan is for developments of fewer than 10 lots, existing language, again, you can do final plan and outline plan concurrently.
Right, okay.
But it stipulates in the ordinance for developments of 10 units or more, prior outline approval is mandatory. And so I do think that under this section where it's highlighted on page 13, total number, page 13 of the packet, I think that we would want to change that first 10 to 20 as well for consistency, so that it would read, a proposed outline plan shall accompany applications for subdivision approval under this chapter. For developments of fewer than 20 lots, the outline plan may be filed concurrently with the final plan, as that term is defined. For developments of 20 or more lots, prior outline plan is approval. So under either circumstance, whether you want to retain 10, you want to go to 12, you want to go to 20,
The two numbers should be
those
the
two numbers
same.
should be the same.
Okay. And so you're saying, does it mean that in the second number, you have to do the outline plan first?
Yes. So if you were doing a 21 unit subdivision, you would be in a position to
You can't
do an outline plan, get approval for that, and then do a final plan separately.
Okay, so I'm reading it correctly to say that you cannot do them concurrently?
For
For 21.
subdivisions of 20 or more lots,
Yeah,
correct.
okay.
But right now, currently it's 10.
Yeah. And your confusion is well understood because that first sentence should have said changed from 10 to 20 as well.
Okay,
Just to clarify, so the language in the bill is 20 or more residential units, is that correct?
It is for what triggers site review, cannot be required for developments of 20 units or more. So it's
Okay.
somewhat inverted from what we're discussing right now. So,
Well, clearly more is better.
It's just it's really just a timing thing. So it streamlines it time-wise. I personally would, rather have people take more time and do a better, and go through finding out what they need to do. I mean, I don't mean to put it on staff, but if, it just means that potentially there'll be more slop in larger subdivisions than there is now, and people will end up finding out that they have stuff they have to deal with they didn't know.
there is that potential if somebody was doing a subdivision, even now for 10 units or less, and assume that everything was accurate, and then when they get out onto site and find grade issues and have to make amendments, in
Right,
that
and-
situation, an outline and final plan probably would have been advantageous, but if they do them concurrently, they may run into those issues. This does increase that threshold, though. So for,
Everybody rushes in thinking they know what they have. Just the way it is.
Right, because they walk the site, so. Eric?
I don't see this for under 20 having much of a difference in impact. If a developer wants to do this, to do the two-step process, they could still do that, correct?
yes.
By the way it's written. So if I was going to do it on the cheap, or if I was going to put together a development package and then sell it to someone else that could build it, maybe I'm not the developer, the two-step process might be the way to go because I get a outline of how things are going to be laid out, a nod from the city, like, yeah, this can work. You still have engineering to do and you still got this other stuff, but in theory, the outline works. Then I could go sell it. Like that's the only real advantage I see. If I was going to develop myself, my engineers would be involved in the beginning to help do the outline because we got to build whatever the outline says. Just because I, as a developer, don't have any background in architectural or engineer, draw it on a piece of paper and says, well, this is what I want to do. Is it okay? The city might say, yeah, that's good. And then I get into engineering and figure out I can't build it. Well, I've wasted a whole bunch of money and time. And so I think by sticking with the 20 mandatory two-step process is good. I think if someone goes to the single-step process for less units, they're just taking a lot of risk on themselves, in my opinion, which most people don't want to do. But you also might get a project that's sellable to somebody that can actually build it on paper and get it out there for the entity, the nonprofit, whoever it is, to build it because you have spent a little bit of time to get to work with the city and get the outline done.
Yeah.
So I don't see a big problem with going one step less than 20 if the risk is on the developer.
Okay. Okay.
I also don't think it's going to get more houses built, but that's just throwing it.
Okay, what's the next thing we need to talk about?
So then then moving on to variances, another stipulation of 974 is that variances involving urban housing would become a type 1 administrative decision and appeals would go to the Planning Commission. So non-UHA variances would remain under the city's existing procedures. For instance, a variance to a commercial development would still be subject to Planning Commission as the initial hearing. But staff is also proposing, outside of 974 and unrelated to it, but because we're making modifications to this section of code, wanting to address a recent LUBA ruling that clarified that the city's current code language effectively prevents approval of driveway variances above 18% grade, even for pre-existing lots. And in practical terms, that creates problems for some older legal lots of record where compliant access may not be physically possible because of the existing grades. So the proposed amendment would allow for variances above 18% for pre-existing lots of record where no compliant access alternative exists, and provided that the all variance approval criteria are satisfied, which would also involve review by the fire department for access. And so that's, again, not mandated by 974.
So I'm curious if there's any particular projects that have driven that decision.
The LUBA ruling did come from the property at 231 Granite Street. And so that the DeBoer house has a pre-existing driveway of approximately 27%, that they were bringing it down to 24% at points. But LUBA found that because our variance criteria said not to exceed 18%, that was not a variance there was not a permissible variance to exceed that. So.
We did a no-no.
Well, it essentially, it doesn't bring up the argument in terms of making legal lots of record unbuildable without that allowance. So I would say this is not dissimilar to the project that was approved at Grand Terrace, where it was the 210 units on 99, 1511 99, Highway 99. In that proposal, the LUBA remand identified that the city's annexation criteria did not include allowances to provide exceptions for street exceptions for the sidewalk to be curbside. However, ODOT's right-of-way and rules required it. So the city amended our annexation code to create that exception allowance following that remand from LUBA. So similar in that capacity.
Anybody have any questions? Anybody have any questions about that?
Yes, I have a question.
Go for it.
Thank you. I hear you that it's similar in terms of the possibility of changing the code to circumvent a LUBA decision that prevented a decision of the commission or the council. But I'm wondering about qualitative distinctions between the Grandview Terrace example and the current example before us with the 18% cap on a variance for a driveway. How many older legal lots of record are potentially affected by the existing variance limit?
We've not done an assessment, a site-by-site assessment of all legal lots of record that are yet to be developed. I would presume that you're probably talking about a dozen or maybe more that would fall under the steep, physically constrained steep slope properties that are legal lots of record that are yet to be developed. But we could do that analysis and bring that back. It's not large areas of the city because most have, if they were not subdivided prior to 1998, when our hillside ordinance went into play, they would not be, for new partitions to create new lots in steep areas, they would be subject to that 18% grade. And that still remains stipulated in the code.
Awesome. Was there a specific reason at the time of adoption why the variance cap was set at 18% and not 17 or 19?
If you read the code carefully, it says for new lots. So I think it was maybe an acknowledgement that pre-existing lots would not have that 18% limit, but for all new lots created within steep slope areas, they would be required to demonstrate access at 18% or being able to meet that grade through engineering. But again, I don't think it was conceived of that 18% would have precluded pre-existing lots of record from developing. And I think an argument could be made, but was not at LUBA by the respondents. So.
And the proposal that's floated here tonight would effectively cancel that 18% cap. Is
Not
that
for
right?
any lots that were created as, after the adoption of the hillside ordinance, and not for any lots that are created
Just
going
for older
forward.
pre-existing lots?
Only for pre-existing legal lots of record.
Okay.
And if they go to subdivide, they'd be in a position to demonstrate that 18% is met.
So just to clarify, so the logic there is that because the legislation or the code was not in place at the time that those lots were deemed buildable, that they should be grandfathered in and exempt from the 18% grade restriction, requirement. Is that the logic?
That they
I'm
be
just trying to
subject
understand.
to a variance.
That they could be, right, that
Yeah.
they're able to apply for a variance.
Right.
Yeah, because the basic law
Yeah, I
is
get
15%.
Yeah, so currently the code reads, under the variance section that we're talking about, that flag drive grades, and again, it's under a section of our code that's related to partition and the creation of new lots. And it states under that flag drives shall not exceed a maximum grade of 15%, and variance may be granted for flag drives for grades in excess of 15, but no greater than 18%. And again, because that was under a section for the creation of new lots. I think that was the rationale behind it, that it didn't necessarily apply to existing lots of record. But again, with this LUBA ruling, that is the section of code that was presented and was granted a variance to. So the new language to put serving newly created lots for grades in excess of 15%, but no greater than 18%, and then going on to say variances may also be approved for grades in 18% for driveways serving pre-existing legal lots of record, which would otherwise be inaccessible, is essentially the new provision that we're asking you to consider.
So do we need to put something in there about a date, a time, a year, serving newly created lots?
Legal
since-
lots of record solves it, I think.
We could put legal lots of record as in
As
place
of-
as of, and find the date of the
When that-
hillside ordinance, if that would
I
satisfy.
would think that would be more clear.
Yeah, because theoretically, any lot created after that date would have been subject to the 15% maximum grade or up to 18 with the variance.
Right, but nobody reading the code's gonna know what that is, so.
Right.
I think putting that date in there would be good.
Sorry, just one more question. So the rationale here is that someone's made an investment in a piece of land, now they're unable to develop it because they can't apply for this variance beyond the 18 degrees, right? Or the
Correct.
18. And so somehow by excluding those properties, whereas holding newer properties to that requirement is somehow has an economic impact on the original investor, buyer, owner. Is that it? Am I getting it?
It does, and it also has an impact on housing stock. So
But
if those
all
dozen
new
properties,
all new development has to apply. I mean, it has to conform to the 18 degrees.
well, if you have a vacant lot that is all over 35% that only has an access via driveway that's, over 18%, it could not apply for a variance under this standard, so that lot would become unbuildable.
But we
Can't
don't
legally
like
do that.
unbuildable lots, so. So we've got, have to figure out a way to get them to have a house on it.
Chair.
Sure.
Since we are just talking about one property that went in front of Luba, this is the test. So I pulled up the property. It is a flag lot to some extent, but I believe the bottom, the flag pole, is the flattest of what would be the driveway. If the garage was built at the bottom of the property and the house was built on top of the garage, would it still not be less than 18%?
The property that came before you that was approved by the Planning Commission and the City Council, the house was located at the closest point to the driveway's terminus.
It was at the top of the property. The property in
No.
my, well, it was at the.
I might be wrong on the address. So there was one at 231 and one at 431. So 431 Granite is the property. You're correct on the one that
231. yeah.
231, and that did meet an 18% driveway grade.
Okay. So it's the one
It's-
that we toured. Is that, what's the 430? Is that the one we toured where they came back and asked for variance on a retaining wall?
No, that was 231. So I stated the wrong address first.
231 is
Here-
is DeBoer.
239.
39.
Okay, so 239 and 231 are the two.
Okay.
One of which was developed and it met an 18% grade, and the driveway is largely installed, and it was all installed on private property. The other lot that recently was adjudicated by Luba is for a shared driveway across the neighboring property's easement, and that is a 24% slope, and as such, the only way to access the property is to build a driveway that exceeds 18% at points.
And what's that address?
I think it's 231.
No, 239 is, it's 231.
It's-
you're talking.
Three-
You're talking about 231, 239.
329, I believe.
Thank you.
Which one's divorced?
329.
329.
231.
doesn't access off through, it goes through an existing shared driveway.
Correct.
And then takes off on its own
Yep.
through private property.
Yep.
So which one are we talking about? I'm sorry. 231?
329.
329. 321,
That's 329
The one's built.
I screwed up.
Yeah.
It's not 239. It's 329.
Either way, we probably shouldn't be talking about a project that is in process because it has been remanded from LUBA.
Gotcha.
But there are a number of lots in town that are on steep slopes that could not otherwise be developed with a driveway of 18% grade or less. It just isn't achievable.
And I'm sensitive to that, and I think we should make amends to make sure that's right. But what I don't want to do is take those half a dozen properties and then they put the garage and extend the driveway wherever they want, exceeding where it could have been built
Sure.
down lower on the property and be a legal property and have legal access. But yet we've given carte blanche to just go ahead and build it however you want because of this,
Yeah,
this
so-
correction that we need to make. So I guess I want to make sure we put some guardrails
Yeah.
in there to say, if it's feasible to give you access to your property and to put a garage at the, whatever the closest area is.
With the least impact on the
least impact,
natural slope.
then I would feel comfortable granting greater than 18% under those
So
conditions.
then that would point to the variance criteria under 18.5.5, which this section in granting a variance, they would have to meet those criteria. And one is that the applicant has taken measure to reduce the adverse impact on the natural area. So that is already a consideration point, even for the one between 15 and 18 or 18 and greater if a modification was made.
Thanks, Brandon, for explaining that. Thank you.
And this would, under 974, this would come back, this would come to us for,
Yes, we were looking at bundling it with these modifications and bringing it back at this point.
no, I get that, but,
Oh.
but in terms of implementation, would somebody who comes in for a variance for more than 18%, would that come to planning commission? Or would that be a staff
No,
decision?
that would be a staff decision
Okay.
unless appealed to the planning commission.
I'll just add that, I mean, I understand that their intention is to close a gap in the code, but the optics are not great, given the proximity of the LUBA decision.
But I would think the LUBA decision just exposes something we didn't know before. And so we probably need to correct it. However, we would feel best that that happens, in my opinion.
All right?
Okay, so you'll make the changes
Yeah.
based on what we talked about tonight, and we'll have another shot at this at the public hearing.
So then the next section on the total page 14 through 16 of the packet relates to residential design standard, and it limits cities the ability to certain residential design standards to larger one and two family developments containing 20 or more units. Largely, this doesn't impact the city of Ashland so directly because for the majority of cities, single-family residential, we don't have residential design standards. And because it's for 20 or more units in one and two family developments, our residential design standards for multifamily are not held to that standard. So a 15-unit multifamily development still can be subject to residential design standards. But essentially, the state is looking to restrict aesthetic-based design requirements for larger developments. We do have some portions of our residential design standards, specifically in the North Mountain Neighborhood Plan, that do have design standards. So a one and two family, 20-unit development in that area, we should modify the design standards in that section to, again, align with 974.
Again, how many, so there's that one large portion, that one large
one.
lot. That's the only thing that's left that hasn't already gone through
Right, the
approvals.
Kestrel has already received approval, and again, that was for triplexes and a duplex. But the property to the south of that, north of Bear Creek,
Right.
part of the North Mountain Plan coming in for 20 units or more would be subject to residential design standards under our existing code, which conflicts with 974.
Yeah.
And this part of the, I guess, what is it, standards for single-family dwellings and duplexes, that dovetails off of Section 8 of 974, right? That's the part of the bill that exempts 20 or more residential units from those design criteria, right?
Yeah.
And it's my recollection that Section 8 of the bill has a sunset date.
Is it 2031?
It's January 2, 2033.
Oh.
And so I'm wondering if it would be a good idea to attach the same sunset in our code revision.
You may not know the answer to this, but why would you release subdivisions that are larger than 20 units from design standards and not ones that are less than?
Again, I think it, I can't
I
speak
know.
for the legislature, but I think the intention was to promote large-scale housing developments and reduce burdens for,
Why not just
Develop.
take it away from all, I mean, the count doesn't make sense to me.
yeah, my initial take on that was that it seemed inverted as well, that if you wanted to encourage housing on infill on,
Yeah,
one or
you
two
could
lots.
Get rid of design standards on less.
Correct.
Right.
But again, I think that design standards in many communities are utilized for neighborhood consistency and infill of a single-family lot on an existing subdivision. That if you removed it from 1 and 2 family, that wasn't part of a larger new development, that could have implications on HOAs and other contracts, but.
Seems like the HOA rules would overrule the city code.
In some circumstances, not all. For instance, accessory dwelling units, state legislation modified all blanket cancellation of any provision in an HOA that precludes accessory dwelling units in the state of Oregon at this point.
Anything else?
It just seems like the intent of the legislature there in Section 8 was to address an immediate crisis and need for construction of lots of new housing statewide.
So you can make really big, ugly developments, but your smaller ones have to be cute.
Particularly in suburban areas where that might be more compatible with the character of the place.
As long as you do them before 2033.
Exactly. And given that the legislature recognized that it's probably a short-term crisis, I think it would be a good idea if we followed suit insofar as we're required to do so,
that part's-
but we don't make that change permanent.
I think that makes total sense. I just question the whole idea, that's all.
Yeah, and I do too.
So Brandon, I don't see anything else in the code where we put a sunset on it. Can we add a sunset
Yes,
to this section?
we could.
Okay.
And then in 2033, somebody should come back and amend it. So,
We'll be looking to you for that.
you'll really be squinting, I think.
Any other points of discussion or comments, or go for it?
Thank you. I have just one quick observation on the very top of this discussion is total page number 11 under the new definition of urban housing application to be added to chapter 18.6.1. At the bottom of the page, it shows in blue type what that proposed definition would be. It's 2 sentences. The first sentence is really long, and it ends in within the urban growth boundary zoned primarily for residential and mixed-use development or proposed for residential use. And I'm wondering if that should be planned for residential use rather than proposed for residential use, because planned is the language of the statute. Proposed is a little bit different and could be read differently. And I think the word planned refers to the existing code and leaves no room for interpretation, whereas the word proposed adds some you know, some grounds to argue what that might mean.
Sure.
That's all I have.
You want to look into that, Brandon?
Yeah, I made a note of it. We want the definition to align with the state statute to be as seamless so that they clearly are urban
Yeah,
housing
well-
applications.
Let's not set up a LUBA appeal. Okay, I think we're done.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so we're done with our discussion items. We move on to open discussion. Anybody have anything to talk about? Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.